Imagine waking up, not in a warm bed, not in a house, but beneath a sky filled with stars nearly 40,000 years ago. The fire in your camp is almost out. The cold bites at your skin. Somewhere in the darkness, a wolf howls. Tomorrow, your tribe must hunt again. And failure isn't an option. Because in this world, missing just a few meals doesn't make you hungry. It can kill you. Food isn't the only thing keeping your tribe alive. There's someone else, sitting quietly beside the fire. The oldest person in the camp. Their hands are scarred. Their hair has turned white. They can no longer run with the hunters, but nobody questions their place, because this elder knows things no one else does. Which berries will poison you? Where the river still flows during a drought? How to escape a charging bison? Which cave should never be entered? Because 20 winters ago, something inside never came back out. In a world without books, without maps, without schools, their memory is the library. Lose them. And your tribe doesn't just lose a person. It loses generations of knowledge. Now imagine something strange begins to happen. One morning, the elder forgets the path to the river. People laugh. Everyone forgets things. A few days later, they mistake their own grandson for a stranger. The laughter stops. Weeks pass. The greatest storyteller in the tribe suddenly forgets the ending of a story they've told 100 times. The hunters exchange worried looks. Some whisper that an evil spirit has entered their mind. Others believe old age is finally winning. No one knows the truth, because there is no word for Alzheimer's. But here's the question that has puzzled scientists for decades. Could something like Alzheimer's have existed long before hospitals, long before medicine, long before civilization itself? Or is it a disease that only appeared after humans began living modern lives? The answer isn't hidden in a hospital or a laboratory. It's buried somewhere beneath thousands of years of dust, waiting for us to piece together one of humanity's oldest medical mysteries. At this point, you might be thinking, wait a minute, didn't ancient humans die at the age of 30? If that's true, then this mystery is already solved. No old people, no Alzheimer's. Game over. Except that's one of the biggest myths about human history. Our ancestors didn't have an invisible timer that suddenly stopped at 30. That number comes from average life expectancy, and averages can be incredibly misleading. Imagine 10 children are born into a tribe. Several die before their 5th birthday. One is killed by a cave lion. Another falls from a cliff. A hunter is fatally injured by a wild bison. Suddenly, the average age drops dramatically. But that doesn't mean everyone died young. In fact, if someone survived childhood, avoided predators, escaped deadly infections, and didn't become lunch for something with much bigger teeth, they could live for decades. Some ancient humans likely reached their 60s. A few may have lived even longer. Now think about that for a second. You're living in a world with no doctors, no antibiotics, no painkillers, not even a toothbrush. One infected tooth could become a life-threatening problem. A broken leg wasn't a trip to the hospital. It could mean the end. And yet, some people still grew old. That alone is remarkable, which tells us something even more fascinating. Old age wasn't impossible. It was an achievement. Every wrinkle, every scar, every gray hair was proof that someone had beaten impossible odds. In many tribes, the oldest people weren't the strongest. They were the wisest. They remembered where animals migrated during harsh winters, which plants could heal a fever, which mushrooms would kill you before sunrise. Think of them as walking hard drives, except unlike your phone. There was no backup. If the elder forgot, that knowledge could disappear forever. And that's what makes this mystery so terrifying, because Alzheimer's doesn't just steal memories. In the ancient world, it could steal a tribe's future. But before we can answer whether ancient humans suffered from it, we have to solve another problem. How do you diagnose a disease when the organ it attacks turned to dust tens of thousands of years ago? Imagine trying to solve a murder. But the body disappeared, the fingerprints disappeared, the weapon disappeared. That's exactly what scientists are dealing with. Because Alzheimer's commits the perfect crime. It attacks the one organ that almost never survives long enough to tell its story. The brain. When archaeologists uncover an ancient skeleton, they can see broken bones, old injuries, missing teeth, even signs of arthritis. It's like reading the final chapter of someone's life. But when it comes to the brain, the pages have been ripped out thousands of years ago. It quietly returned to the earth, which means if an ancient human forgot their children, forgot how to make fire, or forgot the path back to camp, almost nothing in their skeleton would reveal it. And that's incredibly frustrating. Imagine spending your entire career searching for clues, only to discover that time destroyed the most important evidence before you were even born. So, how do scientists investigate a disease they can barely see? They become detectives. Instead of looking for brains, they look for footprints. Not footprints in mud, footprints left behind by evolution. One clue comes from our DNA. Another comes from living chimpanzees. Another from tiny proteins that quietly build up inside aging brains. Each clue is incomplete, but together, they begin to tell a story. And then, scientists notice something deeply unsettling. Some of our closest relatives, chimpanzees, can develop certain Alzheimer's-like changes as they grow older. Not exactly the same disease, but enough to make researchers stop and ask, could this mystery be far older than humanity itself? That single question changed everything. Because if the roots of Alzheimer's stretch back millions of years, then perhaps the first human with Alzheimer's wasn't the beginning of the story at all. They may have inherited it from ancestors who lived long before the first campfire was ever lit. Now the investigation had a new suspect. Not old age, not modern life, evolution itself. At first, the answer seems obvious. If Alzheimer's is so devastating, why didn't evolution simply erase it? After all, evolution has had millions of years to work. Shouldn't it have fixed the problem by now? Surprisingly, no, because evolution has never cared about making you old. It only cares about getting you old enough to have children. Imagine you're living 50,000 years ago. You're 25, strong, healthy, you survive hunts, you raise a family, you pass your genes to the next generation. From evolution's perspective, mission accomplished. What happens when you're 70? That's a different story. Nature isn't planning your retirement. It isn't trying to help you remember where you left your spear. It isn't worried about birthdays. It's only concerned with one thing. Did your genes make it to the next generation? If the answer is yes, evolution has already won. It's a brutal way to think about life, but it's also one of biology's most important rules. Now, here's where the mystery gets even stranger. Scientists discovered that one version of a gene called APOE4 is linked to a higher risk of Alzheimer's. At first, that sounds like terrible news. But genes often have two sides. Imagine carrying a backpack. Today, it feels heavy, annoying, something you'd rather leave behind. But thousands of years ago, that same backpack might have been filled with food, or water, or tools that kept you alive. The burden was once an advantage. Some researchers think APOE4 may have helped our ancestors survive infections, or make better use of limited food during times of famine. If that's true, then evolution wasn't making a mistake. It was making a trade. A gene that helped people survive a dangerous world may also increase the risk of disease much later in life. It's a reminder that evolution doesn't build perfection. It builds compromises, strength, in exchange for weakness, speed, in exchange for injury, a larger brain, in exchange for more complicated diseases. And that larger brain gave humans something extraordinary. We could remember faces from decades ago, learn thousands of words, pass stories across generations, imagine the future, build civilizations. But perhaps the more complex the machine, the more ways it can break. A stone axe is hard to damage. A modern computer is incredibly powerful, but far easier to crash. Maybe the human brain followed the same path. The very organ that made us the smartest species on Earth may also have become the most vulnerable. And that leads to one final question. If ancient humans really did experience Alzheimer's, what would their families have done? Would they have abandoned them or cared for them? The answer reveals something extraordinary about what it truly means to be human. So, did ancient humans get Alzheimer's? The most honest answer is maybe. Some almost certainly lived long enough for diseases of aging to become possible. They shared much of the same biology we do, and some of the genetic risk factors that exist today are ancient. But because brains rarely survive for archaeologists to examine, we may never know for certain. For most documentaries, that's where the story would end. But I think the more interesting question is this. If someone in an ancient tribe slowly began losing their memories, what happened next? Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine you're a hunter returning to camp. The fire is glowing. Children are laughing. Dinner is cooking. Then you notice the oldest member of your tribe, standing alone. They're staring into the darkness. Not because they're watching for predators, but because they can't remember which shelter is theirs. A child runs over. Grandfather. The old man smiles. But he doesn't know who the child is. Silence. No one knows what to do. There are no doctors, no medicine, no diagnosis, only confusion and fear. Some tribes may have believed spirits were involved. Others may have thought old age itself was taking the mind away. We simply don't know. But archaeology gives us one beautiful clue about our ancestors. Again and again, researchers have discovered prehistoric skeletons belonging to people who survived terrible injuries. Broken hips, missing limbs, severe disabilities, injuries that would have made hunting impossible. Yet, they lived, sometimes for years. That could only happen for one reason. Someone fed them, protected them, waited for them, cared for them. Think about that. In one of the harshest environments humans have ever faced, where every extra mouth meant less food for everyone else, people still looked after those who could no longer look after themselves. Maybe, if an elder slowly lost their memories, they weren't cast aside. Maybe someone still held their hand. Maybe someone still shared their food. Maybe someone patiently listened, even when the same story was told for the 100th time, because that's something deeply human, not intelligence, not language, not tools, compassion. So, did ancient humans get Alzheimer's? We may never know. But if they did, I'd like to believe they weren't remembered for what they forgot. They were remembered for everything they taught, before the memories faded. Because in the end, civilizations aren't measured only by the buildings they leave behind. They're measured by how they treat the people who need them most. And perhaps that story began long before the first city, long before the first kingdom, long before history itself. It began around a campfire, where one human chose to care for another.